This is Marcus Whitney's audio universe.
Like, you gotta do the work. You gotta show up and just do the work.
All right, Marcus Whitney Live. We are here Monday through Friday, 12 Central. And we're so happy to be back here again. It's a prettier day here in Nashville today. I'm excited about my conversation. The guest today is Nick Cromydas. He is the founder and CEO of Hunt Club. Nick is a new acquaintance for me. We met through a mutual friend, Curdy D. And I love the company that Nick is building, has built, and we caught up at the right time, talking about the future of work. I'm not going to steal his thunder and let him talk about his company a little bit, but Nick, thanks for being here, and please let the listeners and the viewers know who you are.
Club, and Hunt Club's a new category of search firms. So we leverage a expert network, basically thousands of business leaders all referring to help you find your next great hire. So the whole idea is great people know great people, and we have technology and communities that power that.
Awesome. So what was your inspiration for starting Hunt Club?
Yeah, so the original idea, so I built a couple different tech businesses for over the course of like 2012 or up until now. And the whole idea kind of came from, I kept referring people directly to executive recruiters and they kept getting hired. And I had a buddy he was running basically the CMO practice of a large executive search firm. And he kept winning these digital innovation searches, performance marketing searches, VP of retention marketing searches. And it was when, a lot of like the traditional digital tools and platforms were starting to become more prevalent, and certainly digital marketing. And he didn't really know much about the space. So he kept asking me who might be a great fit in our network and who I could connect him to. And lo and behold, I found out, 5 or 6 introductions all found jobs through a search firm based on me just sending an email to one another. So that like really sparked, I think my interest in the space. And I think the bigger insight, Marcus, was I kept getting an email back from the people that I was introducing saying, they've got this great new job. They're super stoked about it. And they may have never considered it because they were happy where they were if it didn't come from, a friend or a trusted referral, which was one of my relationships. So that was kind of the aha moment. Mm-hmm. And spent some time like shadowing these firms, big ones, small ones, leading brands, boutique ones, and just found really, none of them use any technology to power their processes. Partners are still writing notes on pieces of paper and handing it to associates. But the best ones all crowdsurf this network of relationships they've built and curated and ask people for introductions or ask who they know. And that's like the primary way they do business. So, I thought, what if we kind of put all that together and that's where we're at today. Awesome,
man. Oh, you told us this was going to happen.
Bell.
Yes.
Yep.
So we got church bells going for like 8 to 10 seconds here in the background, folks. So Nick, I think what I loved about your story is I'm always intrigued by the industries that have been able to maintain a foothold through relationships and have not had technology really come in a meaningful way and disrupt the underlying utility. And in your case, you weren't so much disrupting the underlying utility, which is the network itself and the relationships, right? That garner the trust that allow people to explore opportunities that they wouldn't have done otherwise. But you certainly made it work better, right? You used the technology to kind of supercharge what was already there, and I just thought that was really smart.
Appreciate it. Yeah, it's like you think about it. You pull 10 people just walking in the street, like how they found their job. Like many of them got it through a coffee, breakfast meeting, lunch, dinner, networking conversation, and through a trusted relationship. So what we think about at Hunt Club is how do we take all these offline behaviors that people are just naturally and organically doing with one another and build great technology to make it work even better. And so that's the whole idea of what we're doing. So it's still that authentic experience. Like we don't think that you can automate the job of a recruiter. We don't believe that at all. You still need someone shepherding that experience. But what we think is you can build awesome tools, like really clever ways to tap into trusted networks to make sure the right person finds the right opportunity.
Awesome. So let's just give a couple of stats on Hunt Club before we jump into our list of topics for today. So, because whenever I meet a founder, it's like, okay, this is great. You have a really nice website, but have you built a substantial business yet? And I was excited to kind of hear the momentum that you had prior to COVID-19. Everyone's been impacted, but let's just talk about how long you've been in business and sort of what kind of scale you've been able to achieve.
Yeah, and I've built a lot of nice websites that didn't have any customers too. So I've sat on both of those spectrums, Marcus. So it's so our business, really the idea started in 14. Built the first version of it though in 15, and then I've only been full time as CEO really 3 years. I started something called New Coast Ventures, which is a hybrid venture studio before this. So we've scaled it from roughly in 17, 8 to 10 people to over 80 employees. Worked with hundreds of different customers from large Fortune 500 companies like Circle K or Verizon to some game-changing digitally native brands or up-and-coming disruptors like Dollar Shave Club, Pinterest, Compass, to companies that just raised their first round of financing that are looking for their first director of marketing or VP of finance. So built the business. Right now, most of the team's in Chicago, but we're building out kind of both our presence along the West and the East Coast. And we're fortunate to actually do a lot of work in the Southeast too, where we have some awesome customers as well.
Amazing. So let's jump into our list of topics. So the first topic that we want to talk about was the future of work. And I think for obvious reasons, the future of work, big topic right now, right? We're seeing changes that are happening in the way that we're working that we it's kind of like out of a science fiction book, right? It's like we knew these changes would be happening. We could see them happening over time, but we didn't think we would see a company like Twitter, effectively out of nowhere say, that's it, we're all remote. That's it. We're going remote fully, right? And there are so many things that change as a result of that. And the only reason that change has happened is because this event has happened that forced us, it's like we were forced to change, and then we realized all of the potential upside to that change. So how does that now, what are you seeing from the Hunt Club perspective from hiring managers in terms of, are they expanding the scope of where they're looking for employees? Have they changed in any way? What things matter in terms of, a great potential employee? What are you seeing from that perspective?
Yeah, I'll give you a quick stat. So I think we've executed on like over 1,000 searches roughly in the last, call it 3 years. And out of those searches, maybe 5% of them, so maybe call it roughly around 50, either started with the intention of being okay with remote or a distributed employee, or was amenable to the idea in some form or fashion. And so I think the really interesting thing that happened overnight was, now that number is closer to 50%, 60% of our customers now say, like, the geo guardrails are off. I want best talent regardless of where they are. Help me find the perfect person with the perfect skill set versus the perfect person versus a person with a skill set in my hometown. So I think that's blown the gates out of like what's capable from a talent perspective, right? It changes the game on how you think about, your overall compensation structures. It changes the game on how you think about finding people, changes the game on how you onboard them, it changes the game on how you manage them, really everything. So I think it's going to be like a watershed moment of innovation where the entire paradigm of from what you look for, how you find it, how you get them activated and interested, how you get them onboarded, and how you actually start working together is going to change completely. And I think it's kind of a really exciting time for work in general.
And it feels like we're all creating this new reality together. So, you as a recruiter that recruits at scale, leveraging technology, you're a bit of a nexus point. Like, you're not just there to help these employers find people. You're also an advisor to some degree, right? Because you're hearing from all of your clients and you're learning, you're gathering all those best practices, and you should be able to sort of repackage them and share them with your customers. What questions are they coming to Hunt Club with? You know what I mean? Like, because this is a brand new world for them, right? They don't have the playbook. There is no, I mean, maybe you could say the book Rework is a bit of a playbook for this. You could look at firms like Automatic, Basecamp. There are those firms out there, but largely that doesn't mean my culture is going to immediately be able to shift into this new world. So what questions are they asking you about, okay, I used to look primarily within 50-mile radius of the office, and now I'm looking all over the country. How does that change the role of the recruiter?
Yeah, it changes it a ton, right? So to be really successful in tomorrow's world of helping one, advising your clients on getting the best talent, but two, helping them actually find it. It means you need to have a local reach into way more geographies, industries, and pockets of talent than you previously had. Because if I have a customer, in Los Angeles that's now looking for an incredible engineer, they can now actually maybe find somebody for that price point in Cincinnati, Ohio, for $60,000 to $80,000, and Northern Kentucky University is actually a great engineering school, and they may find an iOS developer that's even better than anything that they could localize in LA. And it's just, you have to break down the geographic boundaries and barriers that previously existed, and you have to get smarter and more knowledgeable about all markets, not just the city that you played in. So I think that's a big part of what we're finding we're advising our clients on is, like, hold the phone a second. Like, you're a San Francisco based company and you're hiring a director of performance marketing for a consumer brand. Like, yes, there are tons of those people in San Francisco, but what if I can find you like that same high quality talent, like in Chicago, right? Is it worth exploring a 30 to 40% decrease in what like cost of living is, and for that quality of talent, if it can all work? So that's a huge part of what we're doing. I think a huge part of what we're doing too, Marcus, is like trying to consult our clients on like how to actually hire in this environment. Very few executives in the history of business have ever been hired purely digitally.
Yeah.
So how the hell do you navigate that, right? Where it's I'm hiring a CFO, it's critical for my company. I'll probably have a lot of super hard conversations with this person as our business figures out this environment over the course of 12, 24 months. And by the way, I've never had a beer. I've never shared a meal. I've never met their wife or kids, or husband or kids. Like, it's helping them rethink onboarding and actually hiring practices so they can still make decisions in the event that a candidate is fully remote and they've never met in person is a big thing we're doing right now.
Yeah, that's massive. Wow, that's a big shift for people to get through. On that note of, there's a lot of talent here, but I could potentially find that talent elsewhere. Yeah. One conversation I've seen bubble up around this is the conversation about compensation, right? Yep. So people sort of dug into the comments that Mark Zuckerberg made when he was talking about the projected 50% of the Facebook workforce over the next 5 years would be remote. And then there was sort of the follow-on question about, is there going to be a change in compensation? Because obviously, people know the cost of living in the San Francisco area is like astronomical. No one can buy a home. It's just crazy, right? So obviously cost of living in, let's say, Nashville is much lower than it would be in San Francisco. And he said, there will be compensation adjustments for cost of living. And so there's that aspect of this as well, right? There's certainly I might be able to find great talent anywhere, and not like limit myself, from a talent war perspective, but also there's an arbitrage where I may not just be able to get great talent elsewhere, but I may be able to get great talent at a lower cost, which, totally. and for most great companies, payroll is going to be one of their top 3 expenses, no question. And so, have employers talked to you about that and sort of asked you questions about whether or not it's appropriate or even smart or wise in this moment to be thinking about salary arbitrage?
Oh yeah, all the time, right? Like, you're seeing there's a lot of tailwinds for, certainly in the Midwest, the Southeast, and like traditional markets that haven't had the same plethora of tech talent to be a burgeoning ground for where everyone's moving towards for that quality of life, right? So I think like our customers and a lot of our clients are thinking through, both elements, best talent plus best cost, right? A business at the end of the day has a margin structure to some degree. So if you can get superior talent at a fraction of the cost or a less cost because of cost of living being decreased and like everyone's kind of interested in that. And I think you've seen a lot of like those sort of, they're calling it like the second HQ movement, where a lot of companies are setting up new engineering offices or new customer success offices or even marketing departments in markets that maybe aren't as competitive for talent. And are way cheaper from a cost perspective, just to increase the margin structure of businesses. So I think it's a trend that's going to continue on. I think the conversation we always kind of try and navigate with our customers is like, how do you set that up the right way, right? So it is successful, and how do you make sure you've got your core competencies, close and tethered to HQ if needed, and then you're setting up the right leadership structures and outside offices so you can actually run a remote situation. But I think it's going to be the trend in everything, man. I think you're going to find great leaders wherever they are. They're going to learn how to run and scale departments wherever they sit, and companies are going to have to adapt to that trend. And I think it's going to put a lot of pressure on people thinking for the first time, I'm 33 years old. I live in an 800 square foot apartment in San Francisco. I pay $4,000 a month for like a little bit of a sliver of a view of the marina. Like, why don't I go buy a house in Nashville, right? Why don't I go to Cincinnati and buy a great house? Or why don't I live in the burbs of Chicago? It's going to change the environment a ton.
Have you thought about this enough to try to think through who could be the winner and who could be the loser long term? And let me sort of give you like an analogy I've been thinking about lately, right? So I've been thinking about the whole cable cord cutting analogy, yep. Right? You know what I mean? Like when this whole cable cord cutting thing started, we were like, oh man, this is going to be great. We're going to, be able to do things over the internet. I'm going to have choice. I'm going to be able to pick Netflix or pick this. And now what we've seen is like these different mega corporations are like taking all their content and starting their own. And then, you start adding up the Disney Plus, and then NBC's taking The Office and they're going to launch their own thing. And then everyone got to have Netflix, and then ESPN is now doing one. And when you start adding it all up, plus a YouTube
like a cable
TV
subscription. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So my, this is one of those scenarios where I feel like early on it feels like the employees win because they have the ability to live wherever they want, right? But I just wonder about in the long term, does that change earning capacity, right? You know what I mean? So do you start having regions where your earning capacity is very much associated with the cost of living where you live, maybe more so than the amount of value that you provide? It's just a thing I've been thinking about over the last couple of days as I've seen this conversation playing out, and I just wanted to get your take on it.
It's a good thought. I think that could play out. I think something that scares me a little bit more than potentially that notion is if you look at like the guardrails that have been opened up for the Amazons, the Facebooks, the Googles, the Twitters of the world, who have, insanely high gross margin businesses, right? So they can afford benefits, they can afford increased compensation structures that are maybe 10, 20, 30, 40% above market. Like the thing that actually worries me a bit more is now that the game's changed for them, that they can go anywhere. Do they actually keep their compensation rates relatively flat and pay people the same wherever they are, and really start absorbing a lot of great talent that's traditionally going to earlier stage opportunities or more, earlier stage companies that are on scale trajectories, because their ground is now fertile to hunt anywhere versus just in their core area. So I think you could see that play out where some of them do suppress a certain market and only pay based on what the cost of living there, which makes sense maybe. But I think you may also find out, like just based on the imbalance of supply for digitally native talent in itself, that like the demand hasn't contracted just because we're in a pandemic. Like companies still need software engineers, companies still need great designers, product managers, digital marketers, and so on. It's people that are just in business functions that know how to adapt fast in a business in a digital environment. And that talent is so scarce right now, and there's still such a low supply that like whoever's got the biggest pocketbook or the most interesting opportunity, I still think will win them. And so I actually am less concerned about that, more concerned about some of these bigger tech companies absorbing a lot of awesome talent that's currently working on really interesting smaller problems, or the next great startup.
Great segue, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that was definitely a narrative that was running around here in Nashville when the news that Amazon was coming to town, especially when we heard that the average salary was going to be in the 150K range.
Right.
And we you just take that and you extrapolate it to the 5 to maybe 10,000 employees that they're going to be hiring in this market. Quite frankly, that was not even that fear was not even isolated just to the startups, although definitely pronounced at the startup level, but also other large corporations, right?
They can compete. Their margin structures aren't the same.
That's right. That's exactly right. So, yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. So let's now shift to startups. I do a lot of work with startups, founding partner of a venture firm, sort of where I cut my teeth, and probably will always be involved with startups in some way, shape, or form. Let's talk about the future of talent in startups. What are you seeing there? I've got my own ideas around this, but would love to hear what you're seeing, because you're actually working with some startups on trying to staff their teams.
Yeah, I think you're seeing a lot of different trend lines where traditionally the highest density of startups and arguably the most successful startups are in the densest areas of capital, right? So San Francisco to start, New York kind of from a secondary perspective, and then obviously trailing kind of second, third, or third, fourth, fifth, Boston, LA, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think the interesting thing that's going to happen with, with people working virtually now and location not mattering as much, and people really learning how to interact and manage and do different things and transact online versus having kind of that face-to-face, is I think it's actually going to open up the floodgates of capital quite a bit to smaller markets, tier 2, tier 3 markets that have tons of super smart people that are innovative, but maybe necessarily they haven't venture capitalists or funds haven't invested in as much in these areas as well. So I think you're seeing a lot of interesting trend lines where people that traditionally weren't investing in startups, they're starting to do so as either a part of a family office asset class or as as an angel investor that's getting excited about it just because of a lot of the tailwinds of tech in general. I think you're seeing a lot more people graduate college and think about like going to work for a startup or a tech company versus going to investment banking, consulting, training programs, or a lot of traditional pedigreed paths of employment. And that's then filtering out to, the next generation of founders that are starting companies after they learn how to go join Warby Parker, build it to $1 billion business, and leave as a director to go start their own thing, right? So I think there's a lot of really cool trend lines happening where there's tons of growth in a lot of these kind of tier 2 and tier 3 markets, Chicago included, primarily because like the cost to start a business here is way less as well, right? Where it's maybe you need 1/2 to 1/3 of the capital invested to go out and recruit a great team because of their and then the cost of the talent in that area. And I think that's going to change even more now that like you can build a business and hire somebody in a totally desolate or remote area that's incredible talent and have those costs potentially even drop further. So I think it's a lot's going to change, and I think being in the Chicago, the Nashville, the Atlantas of the world, I think they're going to enjoy a lot of the tailwinds of investors being open to investing more and more anywhere. And I think too, great talent being found and forged in a lot of these environments.
Are you seeing anything specific to particular industries? Just maybe circle back to the tech giants thing again. I was struck last week with the announcements that Shopify made. I feel like over the last 8 weeks, I have done much more digging into the latest and greatest things that all the big tech companies are doing, and not just like the Googles, but the Shopifys, and even looking at Microsoft from the perspective of GitHub, and really seeing like how mature that platform has become. When I realized Shopify was rolling out a bank, essentially, with Shopify Balance, right? It sort of made me feel like, wow, you have Shopify and then you have Square, and obviously PayPal was already a giant. And it's like, how much room is there really for startups in the e-commerce space going forward, right? You know what I mean? So I start to kind of feel like these categories are getting largely closed out, as these companies they're not startups anymore. Shopify is not a startup anymore. It's trying to be an Amazon. They're growing a fulfillment network across the entire United States, and it's incredible because they're going to empower entrepreneurs and startups to be retailers on their platforms, right? But that's the e-commerce world, that's a different kind of business as opposed to the actual pure tech play, right? As I look around, it feels like there are less and less opportunities, especially in a contracting economy. There are less and less opportunities for pure tech plays to really break out. In healthcare, we don't have that many dominant players. We have a couple of dominant EMRs, but there's still tons of opportunities for early stage companies to come in and create value, especially in a massively disrupted space like what we're experiencing today. But I was just wondering if you're seeing any of that going on, where like certain industries, it's like almost like the startups aren't really getting the investment dollars, aren't really growing. When you look at the base of your startup clients, they don't look like they're pure tech. They're much more specialized to a particular industry.
Yeah, I think that you like unpack like the whole thing, right? So like venture capital and startups initially were backed because in a lot of them are to create like outsized outcomes and returns, right? So high growth, high dollar value outcome, usually binary, right? Like works or doesn't. I think there's going to be a big shift in a couple different ways, and you're seeing a little bit of this already. The first being that like a lot of venture dollars are going to move to either industries or pockets that traditionally have been quote unquote unsexy, in areas where technology really hasn't found its way yet. And so some examples are like many different areas in healthcare where the mode of knowledge is just so high that people just haven't entered it. Or think of things like recycling or traditionally businesses that like haven't really thought of like how to apply technology over either for some moat of learning that was too high, an area that investors haven't understood or something along those lines. So I think you're going to see a lot of trend lines of dollars shifting towards more complex industries that require like a true moat to get over or some sort of subject matter expert to get through it. I think you're going to see like almost a democratization of startups in general, where like that word maybe changes, where it's no longer startups, but like digital businesses.
Yeah.
The capital structure changes, right? Like you can have an awesome, and I think this is like the disconnect between what I see with some of our customers and just a lot of companies and friends in general is like you can have an incredible $1.2 million business that cash flows 300 to 500K a year, that grows 5 to 7% year over year, that you've got someone on autopilot where you manage your customers, and like that's okay. Like you don't have to build to $1 billion outcome leveraging investor capital to be successful anymore. And I think that rhetoric is gonna start to come home quite a bit as dollars are interestingly more complex to find, and or people are really looking for new unique ways. I think another really interesting trend line, Marcus, is like you're seeing this huge blur between what's venture and what's growth equity anymore.
Forget about it, man.
We're lucky to partner with some of the biggest funds in the world, and like you're seeing traditional minority venture-backed investors doing majority buyouts. You're seeing growth equity investors traditionally that put minimum $10 to $30 million checks for majority ownership, putting minority checks in for 10% of a company. And like the whole thing's getting wacky. So I think that's changing a lot of the game too, where I think, you're going to see a lot of different things. But I think if you're building a business that in a space that's never had digital touch it before, like awesome opportunity. If you're trying to really find an intersection of digitizing something that hasn't had a digital lens over it before. So think of buying a, almost like an estate sale business that never had a marketplace component to it, right? Like one of our old customers did that. They acquired the company that was completely offline, put digital on it, and turned it into a tech company. So we see that as a growing trend as well. So I think a lot of it's going to change. I think the number one thing that we think through is, at least I think through as a business owner, is like just being super sharp on like capital structures and what your plan is. Because if you're trying to be something that's $1 billion plus outcome or binary, you may miss out on the opportunity to have an incredible $20 to $30 million business.
Makes a lot of sense. So let's turn for the last couple of minutes of this conversation and just talk about your company, and how you've navigated this, right? I mean, you've had to lead a company, you've had to move into the remote era with your own team. What challenges have you had to experience? What areas have you had to stretch in and What have you learned through this process?
Yeah, a lot. So we basically shifted to fully remote, I think on March 10th, somewhere
Same about the same day as us.
Awesome. Yeah. And so it's, I think like what I took for advantage is of beforehand just being in a fully office environment where 90% of our team is local, is like all like the coffee cooler conversations, like the in-person touch points, the learning through osmosis, and just like the overall presence. So like what I'm finding to do as a leader is like of our company is like increase transparency by an order of magnitude. So I'll give you like some actual tactical things we've done is like I send a financial report out to the entire company and how we're doing on a weekly basis now. Just so they have full transparency in how things are going and what goals we're tracking towards. We run a KPI system or an OKR system, and we truncated our goals from, everyone having a couple different projects that lead it into a key goal to only one. Just do one thing really well in your function in the next quarter. And then I think I've increased like my management motion. So like I'm having more time spent on one-on-ones, but actually getting a lot more out of it because of the level of focus and interaction in digital environment. I've had to change a ton, and it's been, there's been a lot of great benefits out of it, but like a lot of really hard things, right? Like our company totally changed. Our revenue contracted immediately when everyone paused all of their searches, right? Because like people don't really hire in a potential recession.
No. And like, let's not forget, the first 2 weeks were free fall, scary.
Totally.
Like, we're hitting the circuit breaker at Wall Street, right?
Stop trading.
Right.
Stop trading now.
Right. Like again and again in the same day. So, I mean, that initial contraction of everyone just putting everything on pause felt universal. You know what I mean? Just felt like everyone was going through it.
Yeah. And it's this is the first time I graduated in the last recession and I couldn't get a job, but I wasn't necessarily leading a company or responsible for other people's well-being or livelihood. And, it's been interesting trying to figure out how to put the company in as best position as possible to support the people here as truly a first-time CEO in this type of environment. So it's been a ton of great learnings across the board. I don't know if I have much advice that's worth taking, but I think what I've found from leaders that have helped support me in figuring these things out is just like over communication, over transparency, and then like truncating goals and truncating focus seem to be like the key to at least getting better alignment. And then hopefully maybe not, but I was gonna say we could add more complexity to it as like the engines rev up again. But right now I think it's created a little bit more rigor for us as a team to get focused on some things.
That's awesome, man. Well, that's great guidance from someone who's actually a practitioner in the field leading people. I'm just so interested in how different people are approaching this and what they're getting out of it. I am hearing a ton of positivity out of it. It's obviously a very hard time. There's plenty of bad news out there, but to hear leaders talk about ways in which they've grown or ways in which their organizations are performing even better under given all the givens is really inspiring for the future. I know that when this is all done, let's give ourselves 2-3 years, maybe the economy doesn't fully return, but we will return to whatever our new normal is going to be. And just hearing these little bright spots along the way is inspiring. It kind of keeps you focused on knowing there is a new normal ahead, and that it could be better than the one that we left. So
yeah, I think it will be. I think we're going to change the way that people work, the way we communicate, the humanizing of business, right? Like church bells in the background and t-shirts at a home desk are going to be fair game. Like it's like I think it will actually be a better working world when we get to the other side of this, and I think people are going to be more authentic with each other. And I think I'm excited about that. Everyone's going to have to deal with what their new normal is, but I think the next iteration of work in business and self is going to be one where collaboration's great and people are their authentic versions of themselves. And I think it's going to make for a better place.
Well, Nick, thanks so much for giving me a half hour of your time. I know you probably have a one-on-one that you need to get back to with your team. Before you go, I'm going to make sure I shout you out. Follow Nick. You can see him on Instagram, Twitter, at Nick Cromydas, and then obviously he's on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/Cromydas, huntclub.com. That is the company. Really, really, really interesting new thinking company in the recruiting space. So go check out what they're doing. I think it's a great group of people over there. And I just want to thank Nick for his time and spending some time with us today. And of course, I always want to ask you to subscribe to my podcast, Marcus Whitney's Audio Universe. All of these shows get archived there, along with some other goodies that I put up there from time to time. You can get this on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. And as well, you can follow me across all the socials. Easiest thing to do, just Google Marcus Whitney. You'll find me. I'll come up. And of course, please subscribe to my newsletter. And that is all that we have for today. So we will be back tomorrow with my good friend Henry Hicks. He is the CEO of the National Museum of African American Music, scheduled to launch in the fall of this year. So excited to catch up with him. I haven't seen Henry in months. So we got a lot to talk about where the museum is going. And also, he's been doing a lot more publishing online of positive stuff. And I want to kind of see where his head is about all that. But for now, enjoy the rest of your day. Y'all take care of each other, and let's build a new normal. Peace.